From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
So I had originally, I'd looked at, you've got polymers and metals was still relatively young at the time. And my thought was that polymers market was pretty well saturated. A lot of people doing it for decades, and here we're going to be a new entrant. Let's give metals a shot.
That was Bob Markley. Bob is the Executive Vice President at Addman Engineering, but it's a testament to the speed at which things changed in the additive manufacturing industry. At the time of this recording, that news was not yet public, so he's speaking on behalf of Third Dimension Industrial 3D Printing. Bob has an amazing story of perseverance, hard work, and dedication in building his own 3D printing shop in the Indianapolis area. He shares that journey with me on the show today and the lessons he's learned through the adoption of multiple production AM machines. Before we get started, head over to www.3degreescompany.com and subscribe to the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the show anywhere you download your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or Stitcher. All right, Bob, welcome to the show. I think you and I met first in person when I was down in Indy when we were at kind of this Raytheon technical conference or showcase. Maybe we'll kind of use that as a middle point, but why don't we start a little bit beyond that and talk about the audience. Where did you get into the additive manufacturing space? What's kind of that origin story of how you kind of started in the metal space and just in general with the technology?
Well, I used to joke around that I got dropped on my head as a child, and then I said that in front of my dad, and he goes, "Yeah, actually, I did." My mother goes, "Oh, I didn't know about that," and my dad goes, "Yeah, I was actually down a flight of stairs." So that's what I consider the origin story. But no, I got into it with little to no background. So my first career, I was a race car engineer, primarily with Indy cars, open wheel theater series. At one point, I'd had kids that I'd worked with. I think I had about half of the Indy 500 field that were my former drivers, which was quite impressive. So did that for about 10 years, and then went to work for Rolls-Royce in Indianapolis. Eventually left there to go work at GM had a facility in Indianapolis where they were doing advanced hybrid transmissions. So I moved back into the automotive space. Now that was, let's see, I guess that was about 2011 or so, 2012. And GM decided they were going to wind that facility down and said, everybody got about 18 months and got a job for 18 months. And after that, they're very gracious, obviously, to keep us on to finish up the projects and get that facility closed. But so as that was winding down, I figured, well, got a technical background. Let's go figure out a business to run and go run it. So I heard something on the radio about additive manufacturing and said, that sounds interesting. Started digging into it a bit more and wrote up a business plan. Took the leap with really pretty much no background, and figured I'd be selling a lot to the IndyCar teams. But what you see with a lot of the racing series, particularly here in the U.S., there's quite a bit of cost containment. So the additive side just didn't really fit at that point. So got it going, started from scratch, and here we are.
So talk about those early moments when you're crafting the business plan. Kind of what was the kernel? What was the insight that you were kind of building the premise around, and what were those first few steps in getting it off the ground?
First step, obviously, finding money. So it was it's the classic story. You're going around hat in hand, begging to friends and family and any banker that'll listen to you. Just to make sure, put the business plan together, and you see all this opportunity. And you have to remember back 2013, we're just screaming up that Gartner hype cycle on the hype side. This was going to be push a button and get anything. And, at the same time, as I came to learn, machines software not necessarily mature. So it actually, I don't want to say it worked out in our favor, but coming from the racing background, as we got this up and going, there was a lot of troubleshooting. I mean, that was what we did most of the time was troubleshooting.
I thought these machines worked perfectly, right? Isn't that based on what I read on LinkedIn?
It just control P. Everything comes out shiny and just exactly what you need, right? With all the properties and no concerns at all. So was the first few months getting up and going, just trying to find a facility, get machine on order, figure out what all the ancillary equipment I would need. And that's one of the areas that we've continued to grow in is that secondary processing in the CNC shop. Literally going to the shop after finishing my real job at GM and scraping mastic off the floor for another 8 hours. Tearing down walls, plumbing argon, plumbing compressed air, painting. Just all the things that needed to happen. So eventually got our first machine in I think it was late September of 2013, and promptly bounced the laser back into the laser and fried it. So that was a great way to start. It worked out all right though. We were able to get that replaced under warranty and eventually kind of start figuring out what we were doing.
And what was go
ahead.
Yeah, what was the process like for which machines do you start with? Even what technology? Did you have that in mind early on when you were writing the business plan? Like, I want this amount of money so I can buy this system or.
So I had originally, I looked at, you've got polymers and metals was still relatively young at the time. And my thought was that the polymers market was pretty well saturated. A lot of people doing it for decades, and here we're going to be a new entrant. Let's give metals a shot. And then in terms of machines, I looked at quite a few. At the time I was a one-man operation, so really doing it all. And I ended up going with the 3D Systems Pro X200 for a couple of reasons. One, smaller machine. So much easier for me to handle as with the capitalization that we had, having the smaller build plates, smaller bandsaw. More importantly, your powder load on that for your initial load is significantly less. We're probably talking an eighth of the volume of standard 250 class machine for what you need for powder. So that that helped me with cash burn early on, and then with the roller, definitely a bit of a unique system. And there's still things I can do on those roller based machines that I can't touch on anything else. Maybe with the exception of a Velo, but again, I don't have firsthand experience with that piece of equipment. So that's why we ended up with our Pro X200, a little bit less expensive than the 250 class machines, and figured we'd have 3D Systems to continue to stand behind it. So we actually bought our machine the day before 3D Systems bought Phoenix. So that's why we've got one blue machine and one gray machine back there for the 200s.
And so you've got your machines in hand, you've kind of hung the drywall, you've plumbed the argon, you kind of got your facility up and running. Kind of, how was the customer acquisition when you first started? Was there a lot of education that you had to do to kind of teach people what are you doing? What does this mean for our business? What was that like?
There's still a lot of education. That's most of what we do is educate our clients and help them on their additive journey. There's still quite a bit of misconception. So, obviously being in a smaller shop, one machine, one person at that time, eventually brought on Dave, who's now our lead engineer. Our costs were pretty low, which was a good thing because, early on in metals, it's like we said, it's you wish you'd push a button, get a part out. That's not the way it works. And there's a high rate of failure So we were able to get enough clients. We were fortunate in that we were one of the first groups to have that 3D Systems piece of equipment and their sales network. This was before Quick Parts was out selling a lot of metal. So their sales network was effectively acting as our sales network, and we were doing quite a bit of work for 3D Systems and some of their clients as well.
And how was it being in kind of the Indy area, Indianapolis area? Was that helpful in terms of some of the industry there, or the types of kind of business industry verticals? There's some automotive and medical devices, certainly, in some parts of not Indy, but Indiana. Was that helpful at all?
So not early on, but it's truly become one of our advantages. So we do have a relatively decent aerospace infrastructure. So any type of NADCAP, I need an accredited NADCAP heat treater. I've got one 30 minutes away. I've got Praxair 30 minutes away. So, I call them up in the morning, say, hey, I need a couple hundred or a couple thousand pounds of powder. And they go, all right, well, bring your truck down. We'll have it for you this afternoon. So my carrying costs are significantly lower. Inspection, really some of those ancillary processes that we don't have in-house, but you still need to fully realize a functioning product. We've got just this great infrastructure that we lean heavily upon.
And as you were kind of building out the technology infrastructure, how did kind of your thinking go about kind of building the team out, right? You're a one-man shop starting out, and then you're doing everything, and kind of there's often that struggle of like, okay, when's the right time to bring someone on with cash flow, and then also kind of projecting out what are the next projects coming down the pipe, and who can I get to kind of make 2 hands 4 or 6 or 8, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. So I was kind of reaching that point and just threw something up on Facebook, and so my lead engineer Dave and I worked together. I don't know, 2006, 2006 or 2007 at one of the race teams. So he's another recovering race car engineer. And it's great when you're young and single, but being on the road for that many days a year becomes very difficult for a family life. So he was looking to come out off the road, and he said, hey, let's talk, and figured something out with him. And he's been with us since early 2014. The years all run together now. It's all one big blur.
So what's kind of, talk about a little bit about today or the present, kind of what's the focus, what types of technologies are you kind of mainly running or most interested in?
Mm-hmm. So, one of the areas that we've seen most of our growth is actually in the traditional side. So having our machinists under the same roof as our additive and our engineering has really been extremely helpful. So we're now quite often we'll do a pre-production meeting on a given component, figure out what we need for fixturing, tooling, et cetera, so we can shorten that lead time. And one of the other interesting things is that also gives us the opportunity to build our work holding right into the components. We're not doing secondary work holding. So it's really developing the full, having all the infrastructure under one roof. Be it print or CNC. Now, there's some areas where it doesn't necessarily make sense to have it under roof. Where you need pretty high. You've got very, very stringent quality requirements. Some of the additional special processes where you really have to be running that day in, day out to be good at it, and for it to make financial sense. So we tend to, like I said, we've got the network in Indy that can do that. In terms of what's coming down the road for technology, we're seeing obviously a lot of movement in binder jet for metals. It'd be interesting to see, where that ends up, what's hype, what's not, how's the software coming along. I mean, at the end of the day, this seems to really be primarily a software game. Your hardware is your hardware. you can't outrun physics. So it's really how well are things control your process controlled through your software.
And as you think about kind of your evolution of the business, kind of when you're first starting out your business plan, kind of what over the last 5, 6, 7 years have you learned that you may have wanted to kind of do differently or update your thinking as you first started out?
Oh, it's always a learning process. I can't point to necessarily one or two things. I think the one thing that I've learned is you can only control what you can control, and be aware of the rest, but don't let it eat at you. And it can certainly influence what you're doing, but at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. So
Right.
it's I think, not necessarily speaking to the business plan specifically, but just as a general rule. So it's everything's constantly changing, right? So business plan is a good guideline, but industry doesn't always go how you want it to or expect it to.
Right, for sure. And so we were talking just before we hit record that you were up at 3 a.m. today. Kind of, I hope that's not a regular occurrence, but can you kind of just talk us through kind of what's your typical day look like in terms of running your business and work in the shop? Is there a typical day?
There's never a typical day, especially as we start coming out of the COVID era. I was on a plane for the first time in over a year last week, and so it's been difficult, not going out to see clients, not being on the road, face-to-face meetings, parts in hands, doing a good whiteboard session. For so long that I've done the accounting, I've done some of the engineering, HR, lead janitor. I mean, you name it. Really, it's just my role right now, and lately has been to give my guys, my team, the tools that they need, and the ability to do what they need to do to get the best parts out to the client. Whether that means, I'm there changing filters or replacing the fan in a chiller, or I'm out on the road selling. It's really just trying to make sure they have the resources to do what they need to do.
Yeah, can we dig into that kind of selling part a little bit too? Like, so there's so much, I mean, as you've been mentioning today, there's the post-processing, the design part, kind of as you sell the technology and you're educating the customer about what it is, like kind of what are some of your perspectives on how you engage with these conversations? Is it really kind of doing a lot of pre-planning to kind of say like, okay, like this is a good approach, or we can do better with this design or these supports or this material or this machine? Kind of, can you kind of walk us through an example conversation or typical conversation that you'd have with one of your customers?
Yeah, so we really don't have a typical conversation. I hate death by PowerPoint. I'll be honest. Mm-hmm. So usually, when we're talking to a client, I might give them, a brief background of who we are, but really I want to hear what their problems are or where they're running into roadblocks and issues, and then help educate them on what we're able to do. Or, there's times where we're not the right solution, and we're going to be pretty upfront about that as well, or help them find the right solution through our vendor network. So every project, I mean, even within the same client has a different goal, right? It could be weight savings, it could be time savings, it could be cost savings, it could be, clean sheet design, it could be end of life. So there's such a wide variety of components and situations that it really becomes speaking to what's of value to the client, and how do we maximize that. So we tend to do a lot of relational selling. So I'm not going to hit you with the brochure and just throw paper at you or PowerPoints at you. At the end of the day, I like a challenge. I'm a problem solver, and I think that has has separated us a bit from a more traditional sales organization.
Yeah, and it sounds like too, like when you bring the parts to show people. I mean, my opinion has always been like for many folks who are just getting into the space or like just throwing parts to some of the kind of bigger service bureaus, like there's a big disconnect between what you send and like all the stuff that goes on to like actually make it like a crappy part and send it back, right? Like there's a lot of work that goes into doing that, and if you don't see it or have someone directly that you can kind of interface with of like, okay, if we would have just changed this, like our improvements, we would have seen a better result. So I've always been of the opinion that like it's so important to see it or have someone there to like shepherd through the entire process and not have this black box.
Yeah, I mean, our first question is always, do you have drawings to go with this? And surprisingly, we're starting to see more of the competition ask for drawings, which is a good thing, right? We don't want to just print paperweights. It's going to leave everybody with a bad taste in their mouth. Alternatively, with the CNC shop, we don't have to hit everything with the additive hammer because that's all we have. You know, it's so really that face-to-face interaction and face-to-face, camera to camera, wherever you're at right now. It really becomes critical in realizing what is the end goal for the customer and what does success look like for them.
Jumping on that, I mean, you've kind of willed this business into reality kind of from scratch, which is kind of doing these amazing things. And I love following kind of your guys' work and catching up with you regularly to see what you're doing. Like kind of how do you kind of, when you're first starting out, like you're kind of building this entire road by yourself, and were there kind of things that you had in mind that you wanted to, that you were kind of grading yourself on in terms of, hey, like we're kind of getting somewhere, like we see success in getting these types of customers or doing these types of projects? Was kind of what was kind of the carrot leading you to kind of continue to keep innovating and doing good work?
Stubbornness. Truthfully, I mean, again, I go back to the racing background, and it's you're only as good as your last race, right? I mean, you're finishing first. You've got to take 2 steps where everybody's taking 1 just to stay ahead. So, really, it's a lot of intrinsic motivation and internal motivation. You know, the client list is great. It's great getting paid. There was a long time where everything went right back into the company, and we bootstrapped the thing. And I don't know why or how my wife is still with me, but here we are. I was a lot less gray when we started, but really stubbornness. I mean, literally, I can't tell you how many nights I've spent at the shop, futon there. Had one project early on. It was probably right around Christmas of 2014, I would be my guess. In fact, I think it was actually Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, staying at the shop because the middle of a 7-day build, 5 or 7 day build, I can't remember which, and the chiller would go off, would shut down about every 20 minutes. So around the clock, every 20 minutes, listen for the alarm, for the beep, we'll turn the chiller back on. So that was a bit brutal. It's same thing almost every weekend in there, turning builds or doing maintenance, removing support. I didn't have a choice, right? Because I've got the home equity line that's, helping me fund the thing. I didn't have a choice. We're going to make it. We're going to make it, or we're going to, literally lose the house.
Yeah, that's certainly big motivation. And I mean, it's to see kind of where you guys are at. And I mean, I think for me, you're one of the funnest people to talk to in the industry because you've kind of lived every aspect of the building the business and running the business, running the machines, working with customers, and kind of cutting through the a lot of the BS and like, hey, here's here's the real kind of no nonsense reality of what's going on, which is oftentimes even difficult to see. I mean, even today, as I reflect on like the last year of COVID, right? Like the main way that people are interfacing, or like you see the best of what people are doing on LinkedIn or whatever. Like it's the shiny, like you don't see any of the meat and potatoes that went into some of that work. So I'm excited to kind of see where that leads when you can actually kind of have real conversations on some of this stuff.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so excited to get back to AMUG this year. The network and connection that I made there, very, very much the same mindset. We're gonna try and figure this thing out together. I've made some very good friends in the industry, and had a guy who's head of a major company, the head of their metal, called me up the other day and goes, "I got this failure. I got no idea what's going on here." Just sat there, chewed over it for 15, 20 minutes. I haven't heard back if we actually found the solution or not, but just the openness and willingness to share in this industry is absolutely amazing. It's the classic case of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I mean, we've got to grow as an industry. We've got to grow our standards. We've got to grow our processes. It blows me away that 7, 8 years ago, we're just trying to stick metal together, just trying to get a good build out. Now we're concerned about microstructure and and just how far everything has progressed in a very short period of time.
And so what's on the horizon for you in terms of, as you're looking at new technologies that are coming out? I mean, there's 145, whatever the latest number is on lasers on the metal laser side. There's binder jetting. There's new technologies like Cerrad and others that are kind of coming down the pike. Are there things that are kind of exciting to you as kind of expanding kind of the new technology, or is it really still about like, hey, look, market penetration and additive, if you think about manufacturing, is still pretty low. Like there's so much opportunity with just existing technologies.
Yeah, it's really fitting the right technology into our portfolio for our customers, right? So we're looking at a couple projects right now where customer needs machine brand X or machine brand Y. So some of it's moving in that direction. Again, there's still things we do on our first machine that came in 2013 that I can't touch on really anything else. It's a laser. You've got powder, you've got galvos. You can throw more at it, but you also run into potential issues when you start throwing more lasers at it. It gets extremely complex. Both laser plume interaction with multiple lasers, heat rejection. I mean, you go from, let's say you're running 400 watts to now you've got four lasers. You're putting 1600 watts into a part. How do you get rid of that? How do you get rid of all that? All your soot and I'm very interested to see some of these more larger laser systems, 8, 16, whatever, 137, is that the one that I heard? Yeah. And just how they control some of these issues. And the programming. I mean, again, you can keep adding lasers as much as you want, but if you don't have the software to control it and get a repeatable process, then it's somewhat inconsequential how many lasers you have.
Right. Absolutely. And kind of switching gears a little bit, as a lot of the kind of folks that we're hoping to reach with the podcast and talk through maybe kind of wanting to learn more about kind of what are some different types of jobs in the space, or kind of like how do they build their skill set to kind of be an effective kind of person, leader, contributor to additive manufacturing teams or the surrounding kind of traditional manufacturing that supports parts of the industry. Kind of what do you look for when you're kind of building out your team, or when you're looking at other teams, as saying like that's kind of the type of person that or skill set that I look for?
it really depends on the role. Having grown this, and I realize it's probably too late, but it takes all types. So I tend to be very engineering minded, very technically focused, and that tends to be what I've hired. I've hired a lot of the people I've hired come from the racing industry, right? Because it's fast paced. You're always challenged. There's not always the right solution or a prescribed solution. You usually got to go out and figure it out. So, that's what I'm really looking for is the problem solving and the ability to pull as a team, at least on the technical side. Probably don't want an accountant that's too creative. So that's really been at least in our early stages what I looked for, and somebody who's willing to get in, get their hands dirty, not afraid to dig out and build. When you're only running with 2 or 3 or 4 people, everybody's got to do a little bit of everything.
Right.
So now we're looking for some more specialized roles, but really, still it comes down to problem solving, ability to communicate, and work as a team.
And so what's kind of on your radar? What's exciting for 2021 as you look to continue to grow the business, hopefully come out of COVID, fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you want to do. Is there anything that kind of what's keeping your motor running? What's exciting?
I'll tell you next week. No, we're seeing a really the world, the broader manufacturing world, starting to accept additive and actually push ahead. We're seeing a more educated client, obviously, than we were many years ago, and a realization of how to utilize this technology. So that's been pretty exciting to us, and we're seeing new entrants come in, right? In terms of the client base, you're hearing more and more about it, and it's productive projects, right? So that's I think been really kind of one of the things that I've seen as we've started to come out of COVID, and just a new way of thinking, or a new way of pushing boundaries of what's possible. I mean, if we would have said, a year and 13 months ago, we'd all be working from home for the next year, and figuring out a way to no travel, kids aren't going to school. None of us obviously would have believed it, or so it's we're finding new ways to do things that we didn't think possible, and that's being able to push those boundaries, I think, is what excites me most in 2021.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining the show today. I look forward to, in a couple of weeks, hearing what that big announcement is, and we'll do a follow-up to cover that as well. So I'll see you down at AMUG, hopefully in Orlando in a few weeks, and
hopefully
talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.